Our speakers ready and mic'd up. Please, Ms. Lidón Gasull, Ms. Eva Guijarro, Ms. Julia Quintana, and Ms. Adriana Gil Juarez. Please come and join us here on the stage. Thank you and welcome. Good morning. Welcome. We can begin, or perhaps we can continue discussing how research is moving forward regarding this. We'll start with Ms. Lidón Gasull, who is the director of AFAC. How do I move the slides? I can do that for you if you like. Up to you. It's on the screen. Do you want us to skip you? Well, I just didn't know how to get started. Okay, then we'll skip you. Go on to Ms. Eva Guijarro. Yes, I'm ready. My name is Eva Maria Gajardo Rodriguez, G-A-J-A-R-D-O. I'm here on behalf of Dolores Bassa, who was unable to come. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers for inviting us. I'm going to be sharing with you a report commissioned by UGT in Catalonia with the support of the Department for Equality and Feminism via our Service for Training and Development. So here's our report. This is an analysis of the equality plans that are collected in our RegCon. We'll be using weird acronyms such as RegCon and PNIs, but I mean, we'll explain what they mean as we introduce them. The regulatory framework in 2019 was very strict regarding equality plans. According to the law in 2007, any companies with over 200 employees should have an equality plan. And then in 2019, also fleshed out into further royal decrees, any companies with over 50 employees need to have an equality plan. And the regulations also set out in great detail what form these equality plans should take. So we've got legislation that implements the rules. There is a Royal Decree 902 of 2020 and then 901. One is for equality of pay and the other one is for equality plans. So we have a collection of all the equality plans that have been registered in the relevant register, RegCon, with all of their contents. This report is far more comprehensive than what I can share with you today. We carried out a quantitative and qualitative analysis of these plans. Quantitative analysis. Our quantitative analysis concerns the RegCom register. It is a register of collective bargaining agreements and equality plans. It's a public register, so anyone can look it up. We took a representative sample for the years 2021 through 2023, and we found that the classification used for equality plans is done through the Catalan classification of business activities. Now, this classification did not allow us the kind of analysis that we wanted to carry out. So we had a problem with this register. These registers were really designed for collective bargaining agreements. They were not designed for equality plans, but at least we had something. So Beyond that, we found that other data were needed. And so we did our qualitative research. We took a representative sample, we sampled the types of measures and their content. What are the items and measures included in equality plans? Access to employment, working conditions, pay, organizational culture and management, professional development or career development, reorganization of time. Look at that. We're talking about equality plans, and reorganization of working hours is one of the key items. And then there is also occupational health and safety, which is also a really important point. If we look at the percentage of measures, access to employment is taken as the 100% reference. That has to be there all the time. So 90% include career development, but the number 3 item is reorganization of working hours, of working time. So this is really important. After that, we have very important other aspects, such as pay. We always say pay is important, but we have found that organization of working hours is especially important, is highly important. So we find that reorganization of working hours enables work-life balance, and clearly there is growing awareness of this amongst the general citizenry and amongst companies as well. And so companies realize that they need to implement measures to reorganize and bring in a greater balance. As our colleagues were saying earlier, it's very important to promote co-responsibility, shared responsibility between the genders, because otherwise gender stereotypes and other gender factors lead to women bearing the lion's share of the burden. So looking at working hours and co-responsibility in Catalonia, on the one hand, we have the gradual rollout of equality policies, and we can see that the kind of support provided is very unequal. For instance, in 2019, 72.35% of parental leave and 93% of reduced working hours for caregiving purposes were applied for by women. Management staff in companies make very little use of such measures. And of course, this limits their ability to influence matters because they are, of course, used as models to be, and examples to be followed. Demanding a lot or too much of women has an impact on the wage gap, on their opportunities for promotion and career development, and as well as their psychosocial health risks. And there are particular groups who are working on working hours that are really, really counter to work-life balance. And so it's important to have policies that value shared responsibility or co-responsibility and promote it. What are the features that they should include? Well, flexible working hours and reduced working hours without being overly conditioned by the need to care for children up to 14. Extended breastfeeding leave for single-parent families, that's also an important component. New situations within existing leave arrangements. The situation now is different from what it was in the past. So, for instance, medical tests and fertility treatments are also a need for leave, as well as adaptation of measures to new kinds of families. And then there is also the matter of leave for gestational mourning, as well as flexible working hours for menstruation or climacterium or no, yeah. And so we need measures and we need actions. I don't know how we're doing for time. Poorly, I'm afraid. You should wind up. Well, yes, I should wind up, but I think it's also important to learn about the conclusions. In terms of general objectives, I would like to encourage you to check the report in our website, and I can also make these slides available to the organizers in case anybody's interested in downloading them. So, general objectives. Organization of shifts and access to tasks, promotion of work-life balance, identification of needs and facilitation to achieve those needs, improved co-responsibility. This is essential in the 21st century. If responsibility is not shared by men and women, we're never going to get anywhere. The tasks of care are everyone's responsibility. And then we have adaptation of working hours and flexibility as long as it is conducive to work-life balance. So we have time-related measures and work-life balance measures, meetings to identify new strategies. We're talking about equality, we're talking about the actuality of business life, of company life. It's important to experience firsthand what is going on in the company. There is a need for transparency and for choices. Not everybody strikes the same work-life balance because not everybody has the same needs. So we need this kind of flexibility as well. It's important to have intelligent management of human resources. That is also crucial. Sometimes sick leave is caused by the need to have work-life balance. We need to be aware of what is going on in our companies. There are also co-responsibility measures. Please come to your conclusion. We need to hear from everybody, and we need to respect other people's time as well. Please. Okay, thank you very much. In terms of actions, well, reorganization of tasks and functional opportunities, naming of a work-life balance agent or person in charge, promotion of flexible working hours, and information about time management and labor rights. Thank you very much. Thank you, and apologies. And now we will be hearing about a study carried out in schools over the very, very heated debate regarding school hours. Ms. Lidonga-Sul has the floor. Thank you very much for inviting us for the second year running to this event. We carried out a study on how school hours in Catalonia impact different spheres. Today I will be focusing on work-life balance and gender equality. I couldn't possibly address the whole study. The debate on school hours is a very complex one. Our study does not solve everything, but what it does do is identify the fact that we need to change school hours in order to adapt them to the need for work-life balance and gender equality. Our work, our research was intersectional and in-depth. The aim is to improve quality of education while analyzing the impact of school hours on student development, family organization, and social dynamics that revolve around children's schooling. In an earlier session, there was mention of the need to adapt school hours to the needs of families and workers. This study does not overlook the fact that the kind of school hours that we need have to be part of an overall comprehensive working hours review. We need a comprehensive reform that includes both school hours, but also employment legislation to facilitate work-life balance. We need mechanisms that change school hours, but do not endanger the right to education of children or other rights that they have, particularly in more vulnerable groups. And we need to avoid having an impact on a negative impact on dropout rate, school segregation, and family dynamics. In case you're not aware of the general system in public education in Catalonia, there are 3 kinds of school hours. In primary school, until the age of 12, and preschool and primary school, generally there are split school hours or continuous work hours, but continuous school hours are only in 25 schools. So generally speaking, schools have split school hours. So students start their school day between 8:30 and 9. They have a mid-morning break, and then they go back to class. Then they have a lunch break, and after the lunch break, they have further classes. The continuous school hours start from 8 or 8:30 to 9. There's a mid-morning break, and then classes continue without a break until 2 or 2:30, depending on the school level, primary, secondary. And then there are mixed school hours, but only in secondary schooling. In this case, there are 3 split-hour days, where there is a break at lunchtime, and 2 continuous school days, starting in the morning and then continuing until a late lunch hour. From a systems perspective, we feel that time uses can only be analyzed, cannot be analyzed only from the educational perspective. There are different social dimensions that come into play. So we need to look at what's going on around us to identify the strategies and changes we need to implement. We're talking about gender imbalance, and so it's important to be aware of certain figures that will help us gauge the impact of different school hours in Catalonia. The employment rate in Catalonia is over 57.5%, over 57%, but it's important to see the breakdown. Over 86% of employed people are working full-time. Men work full-time, 92% of men work full-time, 80% of women are working full-time. That's a difference of 12.4 percentage points. As to part-time work, 7.8% of men have part-time work, 20.2% of women have part-time work. So you can clearly see who is working shorter hours at work, and so we'll see what they're doing with those shorter working hours. Now, looking at part-time work devoted to caregiving, it applies to 3.5% of men and 17.3% of women. Negotiating power to achieve a more flexible working hours. Men have a greater ability to negotiate their working hours, 35% versus 29% of women. As to time devoted to daily care for children or grandchildren, women are devoting more than twice as much time, or twice as much time. So if we look at the impact of policies, we have to consider this baseline situation.
Now, very briefly, in this study, what we tried was to take a look at all these issues from the perspective of experts, also with surveys and open questionnaires to teachers and teaching departments in Catalonia, and also to the families to see what their opinions were. And I'll just very briefly tell you that we're now working on the second half of our study. So we're trying to gather the opinion also of students to see how school hours have impacted them. So just a few conclusions of our report. What we found is that families that have continuous school hours, that they have to try, it's very relevant for them, but we can't extend this to everyone because only in primary school we just have 25 schools that have this type of continuous working hours. And something we've concluded from this is that 70% of the families who have children in preschool and primary school with a split work school hours, they have voluntarily chosen this type of school because it fits their working hours better and their family times better. So it's true that the results of the study show that especially in preschool and primary school, work-life balance has a lower impact on the families that have decided to choose this type of schools with continuous school hours. But as I say, there are only 25 schools of this type, and people have chosen the schools probably because of the times, and we have to look at the reality and the situations of each of those families. But obviously, this is not continuous school hours is not a solution to families who work a split working hours. In this case, there is a huge impact when it comes to find a balance between work and life, and both in primary school and secondary school also. We also seen that over half of the families in the upper half of primary school that have a split school hours need support to pick up children from schools. And in some cases, if we do have a split school hours, it would make it easier for them to pick them up just once a day. And also, families that have split school hours have to pay more in order to cover for the needs they have when it comes to picking up children. But however, school hours currently do not lead to an affordable situation for most families. For those families that both the ones that go to split school hours and the continuous school hours, in both cases, the cost of the babysitting hours before school or for the lunch breaks and also the after-school activities have very, very high cost. What experts tell us is that those children that need to be taken care of both before, during the lunch break and also after school, which allows people to be able to cover those times. But if there is a support for covering those activities, and that would lower inequality. But there are usually families who work full-time, and very often people also have to work in the afternoons. And therefore, if there is this continuous school time, women may have to stop working at an earlier time during the day, or they may even have to give up their jobs, and that reinforces gender stereotypes. And an important conclusion is if in secondary school, these mothers, if they haven't kept up with their professional lives in a stable manner, what very often happens is that once secondary school is over, mothers have a much lower possibility of going back to their jobs afterwards. And also on the basis of the research on inclusive education, we see that this is something that has an even greater impact on mothers that have children who have special needs. They usually have to give up their jobs to look after their kids. And if they have continuous working hours, it means that there is even less time for them to be able to do anything other than care for their children. And that's also a huge financial burden. Another conclusion in our report is that, first of all, the change of paradigm when it comes to the use of time, that cannot be solved simply changing the educational system. That's really important. And I'm sure that this week this will be mentioned once and again. Secondly, we also need to be able to organize school hours, take into account the needs of all the students and also the work-life balance of the families, and with the whole diversity of families that we have, we've seen that in both cases there are aspects which are not working well, both with continuous and split timetables. Of course, school luncheons is something that's key, and we have to take that into also in secondary school, and also think about students that have special needs. And education also is always important, and to have financial support in order to help families that need extra support. So we need to always have this inclusive perspective, think about the educational needs, have the right teachers in order to address special needs for children, and also see how the care can be shared out amongst the members of the families, and taking always the gender perspective into account. This is just a very brief overview of our study, but if you need and if you're interested, you can see the whole study here in this QR code, and you can also, of course, send any comments to us if you wish. Thank you very much.
I passem la paraula.
Thank you very much, Ms. Joshua. We're now going to Ms. Julia Quintana from Evalua, who's going to talk about the need for care in Catalonia. And I'll please ask you to be very brief and concrete. Thank you very much, first of all, to Time Use Week for the invitation. I'm Julia. I come from the Catalan Institute of Assessment of Public Policies, Evalua. We are an evidence-based organization. We work for the public administration, especially for the Generalitat of Catalonia. And today I'm going to show the key conclusions of our assessment of needs for caregiving in Catalonia, together with my colleague Cristina Ferrer, and also Sandra Esquerra and Crystal Kera from the UNESCO chair and the University of Vic. So very briefly, this was a commission of the Director General for Care for Time Organization and Equity and the Secretary General for Feminism. We wanted to see what was the need of care in order to reduce time poverty, and they asked us to assess what the situation is, what are the needs, what are the resources, and what can we do in order to solve some of the problems that we have. So that's what we tried to do. First of all, we defined what the need for care is. It's very obvious, or at least at first glance, but it's very hard to move forward if you don't have a good definition. So we base ourselves on a very general definition. So often we think about the elderly when we talk about care, but we're looking more at care for others in a more general manner when there is vulnerability of human beings, and there's universal needs that have to be looked after in order to make life feasible. Sometimes these are physical needs, so physical, physiological needs, but there's also emotional needs that need to be covered. Everything has to do with the psychological and the emotional well-being of people. And as we can see here, our physical and emotional needs can change over a person's life cycle. Physical needs, for instance, in children, very high in when it comes to 0 to 3 years of age, and of course, the older the child gets, the lower they go. But emotional needs are always very high, both for young children, also teenagers. So teenagers also need a lot of care in this sense, in the emotional perspective. And when it comes to the adulthood, needs, both physical and emotional, are usually lower, except if you have a disease or sometimes issue of mental health. But of course, we do have a case of special needs, and these rise. And then when you get older, traditionally, this is what we think of when we talk about caregiving. So between the 65, 75 years of age, there's a growth in the needs, especially the emotional ones, not so much physical ones. But when you get to an age of 75 to 80, then we have a high demand for both physical and emotional needs to be covered. So this is, and of course, you have the aspects of gender, of social class, territory, and so on. These are all aspects that have to be taken into account. But this shows you a general overview of the needs of each of these stages. So on the basis of that, we use the Catalonia Health Survey and also the Census of Catalonia. And looking at the territory and how it was organized, according to social class and the gender, we looked at the prevalence for the need for physical care according to different age groups. Maybe it's a bit difficult to understand what you see in the slide, but basically almost 30% of Catalans need physical care, so they have difficulties with their everyday activities. When in the case of children, there's 100% that need support, and that in total is 49% of people that need care. The other another 33% are adults between 15 to 75 years of age. And then when the elderly is only, quote unquote, 18% of cares. So there's a much greater need for care when you are older, but of course, we have a very diverse population that need cares, not just the elderly, but also children and adults. And that has to be taken into account. We've tried to break this down at the level of each municipality. So there's an index that shows you what proportion of the people in your town or village need help. And you see we have different slots here between 15 to 40%. And according to this table, we can see whether in your area the group that needs more support is either the children or the adults or the elderly, and that helps municipalities see what kind of programs they need to support. When it comes to emotional needs, of course, there's a lot of information lacking in this slide. In fact, there's very little information available. With all the registries and so on, we have seen that boys and girls up between 4 and 14, emotional aspects have a great impact. It affects up to 7.4%. There is a growth in mental health issues since the pandemic, especially. And with adults and the elderly, there's a 22% of the population affected. And once again, there is a huge impact here of gender and the elderly. So women and the elderly are the ones that have most mental health issues. So this helps us define the problem. When it comes to what is offered, very often, as we often hear from the feminist perspective, there's 4 spheres, which is the community, the market, the family, and the public sector. So in Catalonia and Spain, there's a lot of weight placed on the family, and the public sector is quite weak in this sense and acts more in a complementary fashion. So now let's take a look at what the family does and what the public sector does in order to respond to its needs. Now we've already heard a lot of data from my colleagues and other speakers. Families, as we help, has an impact on the working and productivity figures. Women very often have part-time jobs because they have to take care of others, and women often work double or twice as many hours a week taking care of people, 13 hours a week compared to men that just spend 7 hours. And then it also has a lot to do with the class origin and so on, because women that have a better financial situation can outsource this caregiving activity, but that's not the same for us. And also this depends on whether they are women or men. And then there's a public sector. Here there's huge differences. Women need practically 80% of those who take off work in order to look after their children, and it's 65% of non-professional caregivers. And these are cases in which there's some kind of support from the public sphere, and these leaves are not paid, and and if they do receive any kind of money for taking care, is less than 700 or 800 euros a month. However, there is a growth in the number of men who take paternity leave. So there's practically 50% of people who take leave due to the newborn. So men sometimes take off to look after a child, but always when it's 100% paid by the company or by the Social Security. So in public services, we've seen that kindergartens is the main resource that we have in our territory. We've heard about a lot of municipal initiatives that are very interesting, but may not be available everywhere. But kindergartens or creches, the main resource that we have. So in the age group from 0 to 3 years of age, it only reaches 56% of children, 38% of public schools, and 18.2% of private kindergartens in this case. But there's a lot of differences according to the territory. So in urban areas or where there's a greater need, the coverage of kindergarten is lower, and there's also a higher presence of private kindergartens. That's what we can see. So we have on the one hand the kids who need it from 0 to 3 years of age, which are the ones who need it, and then you can see public kindergartens in blue and red in private. So you can see there's a lot of public schools and not so much private. When it comes to the elderly, there are different types of care homes for elderly. In the case of highly dependent people, practically 20% use one type of these services, but they also have non-professional caregivers. So once again, the public support is not enough in order to offload and take up the burden of the family. So what we found is that the existing public services do take care of very intense periods, or sort of the very early ages, and also the elderly, but there's a limited support, and there's really no support throughout life when there is other cases where you need support. There's no support in these cases for things that are unexpected, unless there may be some municipal support. So these resources are offered as a complement to families, and they do not manage to replace families. That has an important impact when it comes to poverty and time poverty also for women. And there's a lot of variability in the territory. So we have to think of a more articulated and across-the-board support system for everybody. Thank you very much, Canay, for your... Let's just have a round of applause.
Passem la paraula a l'Adriana.
And now I'll give the floor to Adriana Gilgaez from the Psychology Department and Evolution Department of the Autonomous University of Barcelona. So you have the last few minutes to yourself. Thank you very much. Oops, what happened here? Okay, well, thank you very much for having invited me. Okay, we're seeing what we shouldn't be seeing. Oh, yes, now we do have a PowerPoint. Well, we always have technical issues. Anyway, our project is Gender Equitable Interactions Online. It's a European project that had as a goal to find out how video conferencing can help you maintain or to combat inequality in the workplace. So it's really interesting. 4 European countries participated in this: Germany, the UK, Spain, and Iceland, and 4 multinational companies. And we tried to see what's happening at the micro, meso, and macro level. Now I'm going to talk about study 2, which is the meso level in Spain, in particular. And we wanted to see what ideas there were about the different ways of working with video conferencing. So the methodology where we try to maximize demographic variability, but also representing all the different job positions within the company. So our starting point was the literature that we have on the distribution of responsibilities within the home and also in the workplace, and taking into account the gender and the impact it's had during the pandemic with people, women working from home, mothers working from home. And all these authors here tell us that after the pandemic, people do work more from home, but the home workload, as we've already heard, affects everybody, but it disproportionately affects women. Although men are now carrying out more home tasks with teleworking and so on, but the ones that have stereotypes associated to them, such as cooking and washing clothes and so on, are still carried out by women. We also see there's a huge impact on mothers' mental health, especially of mothers who work. There is a huge older burden of them after the pandemic. And these large and exacerbated inequalities lead to a double burden just at a domestic level, at home level, and also in the workplace, especially for working mothers. Then Carson and others tell us, although there are many men who were committed to gender equality and who made use of teleworking in order to help, quote unquote, with tasks at home, but this change is not a report. There's still many that consider that these responsibilities have nothing to do with them and they leave it in the hands of their partners. There is also a huge impact of the least favorable families in terms of finance and also in the workloads. Now, another interesting thing that Pereira talks about is that women who tend to be very perfectionist do even more in order to try to cover this double workload, and that leads to a lot of stress in their everyday lives. And these authors that you see here, Jaworski and et al., says that in spite of the fact that the pandemic showed that if we work from home would be very useful, but if there's no specific policies, no specific efforts made, gender roles will prevail and will be even strengthened with teleworking. So in this study that we mentioned, we wanted to see what these different common sense configurations were, people's perspectives about video conferencing. So we asked people to classify a series of statements taken out from the literature about video conferencing and the different actions associated with it. So we had a total of 59 statements. I'll just show 14 of these here. The ones which you see in black are the ones that are most strictly related to time. And then the other ones in green are the ones that have a weaker correlation. We found that there were 72 participants in our group, most of which were female with between 25 to 34 years of age. And we did a Victoria analysis with weighted averages, and we did a systematic analysis of the discourse in order to see what is common sense and what factors was it reflected here. Regarding the workplace, most of them work from home and been working with video conferencing for over 5 years. And when they answered that, they were thinking about meetings, average size meetings between 5 and 6 people, between 2 to 6 people, sorry. And we looked at their opinion and these video conferences, saw that they had a different way of seeing it, and that it had more impact on working with. For instance, the first factor, which is totally positive perspective towards video conferencing. These people say that it lets them to organize their work in a flexible manner. It's easier to strike a work-life balance. It respects private life. It's a good way of managing their meetings and managing the teams. There's no anxiety in these meetings. And this type of conference would be very useful for working women. But factor 2, we find that video conferences are good in general and preferable to a telephone meeting or a face-to-face meeting. They're easier to access. And especially, you don't have to worry so much about your physical appearance, how people see you. But even so, it's the rhythm of the meeting is somehow hindered and productivity does not improve at work. Ms. Kukla, I really have to ask you to go towards the conclusions because we're going to run out of time and we need a pause before the next one. So a specific conclusion. Well, as we have a series of other factors, as I said, the ones that are more transversal, but in general, that they say that it's not such an effective way of working. But the fourth factor, which you see there, says that video conferences may help, but they're not effective enough. And this also has an impact on private life. And these other factors here that, as you can see, number 5 is important because it focuses on interaction with others and instead of on productivity and efficiency. Number 7 says that it does not take into account time in one sense or the other. Simply looks at the positive and negative factors. And when it comes to the negative ones, we have harassment, we have power relationships, imbalances, and all the factors that traditionally concern us from the feminist research perspective. And then finally, there is a concern regarding the effectiveness. People think it do help them save time because it makes them more productive and they didn't have that productivity in the past. So our conclusion, as I say, we have 3 studies underway, but we cannot simply move from into a straight answer, yes, no, it's good or bad, I like it, I don't like it, helps me save time, it doesn't help me save time, because these are very complex situations. We have to use common sense and look at the way we work. We have to listen to people specifically in each of the workplaces and see whether or not teleworking and video conferencing is going to help them or is going to be more of an obstacle more than anything else. So we need clear instructions in that sense. And we can't just do it any old way. Thank you very much. And we'd also like to thank our other 3 speakers very much. So we'll leave this session here. We'll take a very short 5-minute break before we have our opening session.